The woods behind Kettering Hollow had always been more than just a stretch of trees. Locals spoke of them like a bruise spreading just under the surface, silent, unseen, but sore to the touch. It was a place parents warned their children about, not in fairy tales, but in desperate, hushed tones over dinner plates and flickering candles during the town's frequent power outages. It was during one of those outages, under the bloom of a bone-white moon, that 16-year-old Evelyn Cross vanished. No one saw her leave. No one heard her go. One minute, she was sitting with her parents in their dimly lit living room during a thunderstorm, her little brother Elias curled up beside her, lightning painting skeletal fingers across the ceiling. The next, only her shadow remained, stretching cold and long over the carpet, reaching toward the open back door. It had been left ajar, swinging gently on creaking hinges. Beyond it lay the backyard, dewy and drenched from rain. And beyond that, the pines. Tall, dark, and whispering. It took 6 hours before the police were called. Evelyn's parents, convinced she'd gone to a friend's house or out to escape the cabin fever of the storm, had searched the block themselves before panic rooted in their lungs. Officer Jenny Glick was the first on the scene. She found Elias sobbing in his room, repeating the same phrase over and over. She heard something. Something in the woods. And it called her name. When asked what it sounded like, Elias said only this: it sounded like her, but wrong. Like her voice wearing a mask. They found Evelyn's footprints in the mud leading down the hill and into the woods, but never back out. A search party was formed within the hour. Day 1. The air was thick with the iron scent of wet earth and fallen leaves as flashlights cut through the underbrush. Dogs barked and handlers shouted, their calls swallowed by the dense foliage. The woods felt tighter the farther in they went. Trees grew unnaturally close, their bark riddled with long, claw-like gouges. No one could identify the source. A few trees had symbols carved into them, crude spirals, strange X-shaped marks with hooks on the ends. One of the dogs whimpered and refused to go further. After 6 hours of scouring the immediate vicinity, they found nothing. Then came the blood. About 300 yards into the woods, searchers discovered a streak of bright red smeared across a jagged stone. A closer inspection revealed not just blood, but fragments of fingernail embedded in the crevice, ripped clean off as if someone had been dragged, their hands clawing against stone. Could be an animal, Officer Glick muttered, but her voice was hollow. Near the base of the blood-smeared rock, something else was found: Evelyn's cell phone. The screen was shattered, and the casing was cracked, but somehow it still worked. There was only one photo on it, taken moments before it died. The image showed Evelyn, standing in the woods, her face frozen in a twisted scream. Behind her, barely visible in the frame, stood a figure. It had her face. Her exact face. But the eyes were empty, and the mouth stretched too wide, curling up into a grin that didn't belong on anything human. Day 3. The search was officially called off after 72 hours. Authorities cited dangerous terrain and lack of leads, but everyone knew it was something else. Searchers returned, gaunt and shaking, muttering about howling that mimicked human voices, and trees that moved when no wind blew. One man, Ryan Hall, a volunteer, was found sitting by a creek, drenched in his own urine and blood, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. He'd scratched his own cheeks raw trying to tear off something that wasn't there. He whispered just one word: mirror. He died in the hospital that night, his eyes open and unfocused, as if he were still staring into that forest. A week passed. Evelyn's family buried an empty casket. Then, just as the town began to exhale, she came back. It was Elias who saw her first. He'd been playing near the edge of the woods, throwing rocks at a rusted old sign warning hikers to stay out, unstable caves. The wind had died, and the crickets stopped chirping. The world turned oddly quiet, like a breath being held. And then, she was there. She stood barefoot in the clearing, her white dress in tatters, the hem soaked with blood and something darker, thicker. Her skin was filthy, scratched and bruised, her arms hanging limp at her sides like dead vines. Her long hair clung to her face in wet clumps. But it was her eyes that stopped Elias cold. They were completely white. No iris. No pupil. Just milky voids, like she'd stared too long into the sun and it had swallowed her sight whole. And yet, she was smiling. Not the smile of someone relieved to be found. No tears. No joy. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, and would never tell. Elias screamed. Evelyn didn't flinch. Within minutes, the area was swarming with medics and law enforcement. They rushed her to St. Mercy's Hospital. She didn't speak a word. She let them strap her down, draw her blood, scan her skull. She never resisted, never blinked. When her parents rushed in to see her, Evelyn finally reacted. She tilted her head. Only slightly. Like a curious animal watching its prey decide whether or not to run. The hospital staff kept her sedated. But sedatives didn't work the way they should. They made her smile wider. She bit a nurse the second night, clean through her palm. They said Evelyn didn't even move beforehand. One moment she was lying still, the next her mouth was buried in flesh, her white eyes rolled back. The nurse had to get 14 stitches. She quit the next morning. Meanwhile, the lab results came in. Her blood was wrong. It had human DNA, but also carried anomalies that couldn't be explained. Extra chromosomes, parasitic cells that mimicked normal ones but carried no function. The toxicology report noted extremely high levels of fungal spores, the type found deep underground, near cave systems that had been sealed for centuries. Evelyn had been found in front of one such cave. A week later, she spoke her first words. Officer Glick had come to ask her questions, standard stuff. Where had she gone? How did she survive? Who was she with? Evelyn turned her head slowly. Her bones made grinding sounds, like wood snapping under pressure. She opened her mouth, and in a voice too deep, too layered, she whispered, "You're not the first to look for me. But you will be the last to leave." Then she lunged. The security footage showed her breaking through leather restraints as though they were paper. Glick fired her sidearm 3 times. Evelyn didn't bleed. She just kept moving, her smile twitching wider and wider until her jaw cracked and hung unnaturally low. It took 4 men to subdue her. But the real horror came later that night. The footage from the hospital's hallway camera, 12 hours after Evelyn was sedated again, showed something else. Something that made the head of the hospital turn in his badge. At 3:13 a.m., the camera flickered. When the screen cleared, there were 2 Evelyns in the hallway. One walked toward the exit. The other stood at the far end of the hall, perfectly still, her white eyes staring directly into the lens. The Evelyn in bed never moved. They checked. She was still strapped down, unconscious, lips parted in a shallow breath. But the camera didn't lie. Something left the hospital that night wearing her face. And somewhere, in the deep woods near Kettering Hollow, the cave waits. Its entrance is small, narrow, barely enough to crawl through. It smells of wet rot and birth, of things long dead and longer buried. The earth around it pulses. If you place your ear to the stones, you can hear them breathe. And from the depths of that cave, something watches. Something hungry. Something wearing Evelyn's skin. The next morning, the town of Kettering Hollow woke to sirens. The hospital was sealed off by police tape. Reporters, smelling blood, gathered like vultures on the periphery. Inside, the remains of Officer Jenny Glick were being scraped off the corridor walls. What was left of her? They didn't show the pictures to the public. But the rumors spread fast. No face, no eyes, a jaw broken backwards, folded into her neck like brittle paper. The coroner, a veteran of 30 years, threw up twice and refused to perform the autopsy. The official report said, "Animal attack." No one believed it. At the center of it all was Evelyn Cross, lying silent in her hospital bed, her restraints newly reinforced with steel cuffs. Her face was peaceful. A little girl's face. Pretty. Untouched. But her eyes were still those same ghastly, milky blanks. Unseeing. Unblinking. Unhuman. Her parents, Laura and David Cross, sat on either side of her bed, their hands clutched tight as they whispered prayers to a God who had clearly abandoned them. Elias wouldn't come near. He sat outside in the waiting room, knees drawn to his chest, rocking slowly as he whispered, over and over, "That's not her. That's not her. That's not her." The doctors were no help. The neurologist, Dr. Corman, told the family that Evelyn's brain scans were unlike anything he'd seen. Certain sections of the brain, areas associated with empathy, speech, and identity, showed hyperactivity, as if something else was using her mind like a puppet. And there was more. The white of her eyes. It wasn't cataracts. It wasn't blindness. The tissue itself had transformed, becoming something foreign, something opaque and reflective under UV light. One of the interns, curious, had shown a penlight directly into her eye. She smiled. That night, something moved in the walls. The overnight nurse, Janice Welk, first heard it just after midnight. A soft scratching, rhythmic, like something small was digging, clawing through plaster. It came from the walls of room 209, Evelyn's room. Janice opened the door to check. Evelyn lay still, strapped down, her head tilted slightly towards the window. The scratching stopped. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Janice asked, her voice trembling. Evelyn didn't respond. The nurse backed out of the room, uneasy. As she pulled the door closed behind her, she heard something. A voice, soft, low, half whisper, half growl. "Let me out." Her heart jackhammered. She turned back, but the room was silent. Evelyn hadn't moved. The whisper, she realized, hadn't come from Evelyn at all. It had come from the walls. By morning, Janice Welk was missing. All they found was her left hand, pressed flat against the glass of Evelyn's window from the outside, fingers fused into the pane as if melted into the glass itself. The police had no answers. The doctors had none either. And then, without warning, Evelyn spoke again. It was David Cross who heard her this time. She sat up, suddenly, mechanically, her white eyes staring into space. The straps held her arms, but her body still managed to bend in strange, unnatural ways, her spine arching like a bowstring. Her lips peeled back into a bloody grin. "Daddy," she crooned. But the voice wasn't hers. It was wet. Echoing. It spoke with too many layers, like a choir of buried mouths. David recoiled. "Please," she rasped, "I'm cold." Then she began to tear her own wrists open on the restraints. Not screaming, not wincing, but smiling wider as deep red arterial blood splashed the sheets. It took 3 orderlies to stop her. They sedated her again. But David Cross didn't sleep that night. The sound of her voice, wrong, distant, something old pretending to be something young, echoed through his mind until dawn. And then came the day of the cave. By then, the town was in full hysteria. Parents pulled children from school. The church bells tolled non-stop. Some residents packed up and vanished in the dead of night. They knew. Kettering Hollow had always known something was wrong in those woods. The sheriff organized one last search team, against his better judgment. 6 men, including Father Merton from the local church, entered the forest at dawn, determined to find the cave where Evelyn had been discovered. They never stood a chance. The woods swallowed sound. By the time the men found the clearing, the sun was gone. Though it was barely noon. The air smelled of wet stone and burnt hair. The trees leaned at unnatural angles, the bark flayed and weeping with sap the color of old blood. And there, at the center, was the cave. A black mouth, no wider than a man's shoulders, yawning open in the side of a mossy hill. Something about the shape was wrong. It wasn't natural. It was too round, too symmetrical, as though carved by hands. Human hands. Or something that had learned to mimic human work. The men hesitated. Father Merton whispered a prayer. The first to die was Sheriff Connolly. He stepped closer, flashlight trembling in his grip, and saw something glisten deep inside the blackness. It looked like eyes, hundreds of them, reflecting the beam back at him. Then the sound began. A humming, low at first. Then growing louder. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, the sound of wet mouths vibrating, of folded flesh unfurling. Connolly dropped the flashlight. And something lunged out of the dark. It wasn't Evelyn. It wasn't human. It was something wearing human pieces. The screams echoed for miles. One man, Deputy Rick Hanlon, managed to stumble out of the woods just before sundown. His skin was stripped from his hands, his mouth locked open in a frozen, silent scream. His eyes, once blue, were now milky white. He was declared brain dead by midnight. Back at the hospital, Evelyn woke up. Without warning, her body spasmed. Her bones cracked audibly, her jaw dislocated as she let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was more like 1,000 voices shrieking in unison, layered atop one another like rotten lace. The restraints snapped. The alarms wailed. By the time the staff arrived, she was gone. The bed was empty. The window shattered outward. And once again, the trail led back into the woods. This time, it was different. As night fell, things began to emerge from the trees. People saw them. Half-glimpsed shapes at the edges of the roads. Human outlines, but too tall, too thin, limbs bending the wrong way. Faces with blank, white eyes, grinning mouths stitched wide with black, fungal threads. One farmer claimed he saw his dead wife standing in the cornfield, her mouth slashed from ear to ear, whispering his name in a hoarse, wet voice. Another saw his own reflection step out of the pond and crawl toward the house on all fours. The town fell apart in a matter of hours. No cell service. No landlines. Power cut. The woods seemed to move closer, the trees inching toward the town like silent, creeping sentinels. And above it all, somewhere beneath the soil, the cave pulsed. In the center of it, Evelyn knelt in the dark. Her skin was sloughing off in patches, revealing something slick and wet beneath. Her hair hung in matted clumps. Her eyes, still blank, leaked black tears. All around her, the walls of the cave shivered, alive with movement. Pale things slithered through cracks. Bones jutted from the stone like teeth. And in her mind, where once there had been thought, there was only the voice. It whispered to her in sounds older than language. It promised her everything. And somewhere above, back in Kettering Hollow, the first of the missing children began to appear at their parents' doors, smiling with white eyes, their mouths dripping with dark rot.